Alright, in this video I want to talk about the mark of the beast, hence the title and the clip art here. Now, I'm not going to say for certainty what it is. I'm just going to put all the little puzzle pieces together to give us a really good picture where we can be pretty sure of what it is. So let's get into that. Where we read about the mark of the beast is here in Revelation chapter 13. Keep this in mind that 13 represents rebellion, right? Like Lucifer rebelling against God, like Israel rebelling against God, right? Think about those things. But anyway, in this chapter, we read about a beast coming up out of the sea with 7 heads and 10 horns. Then we read about a beast coming up out of the earth with 1 head and 2 horns. And then we read about the second beast making an image to the head of the beast that was wiped out and restored. And anybody who doesn't worship that beast would be killed. And that they need to receive a mark of this beast, or they can't buy or sell. And this mark is the number of a man and has to do with 666. Now this is just a quick summing up what is going on here. I'm going to give a lot of detail to you. I'm going to throw it at you fast. And I'm not going to have a whole bunch of the scriptures up here. Save some time. You want to get into this, comment to me, message to me, look into it yourselves. And yeah. But anyway, when we look at what a mark is, we can't just go with what we think a mark is. We have to go with what the Bible says a mark is. Now, a mark has something to do with you, your signature, who you are. So an example in the Bible would be God seals his servants with a seal on their forehead. And Jesus says that he's going to write the name of his God on our foreheads. Right? So you can see it's the signature of God, his name. He's writing his name on us, which seals us as his. Right? You can take this as a couple ways. As being like a kid, or even at work these days, you might write your name on what is yours, so no one takes it, right? This is mine. I wrote my name on it. This is my bag. Don't let any of the kids grab my bag. Or you're at work and you have to write it on your lunch so no one takes it out of the fridge, or something like that, right? Another example would be you have to put your signature to allow the check to be cashed by someone else. You have to put a signature on the receipt so that they can actually charge your card. Right? It's your mark. And it has to do with you and your authority and your ownership. Right? So when it comes to a mark here, we can see that it has something to do with somebody's name, somebody's authority, and somebody's ownership. Right? Another example of a mark would be like the seal of a kingdom or the seal of a government, such as the United States government would put a seal that has this eagle and some other details to it to show that this is an official document of the United States government, right? So, getting that out of the way, we can figure out what a mark is. But another interesting detail is I think it's only the King James that says that this mark is in the hand or in the forehead. The other Bibles say that it's on the hand and on the forehead. Now, it could be that it's one or the other. It could be that it's both. But it also could be that it's something spiritual. But if it's spiritual, it's keeping you from buying or selling. So I think what this is this is a spiritual mark, but it's not revealed physically until there's some kind of actual physical mark that makes it where you can't buy or sell, distinguishing who has it and who doesn't physically, because God knows who has it spiritually. But it's not going to be manifest to us physically until there's actually something physical to show who is on what side. It's kind of like in the church where Jesus says that the wheat and the tares grow together. and you don't know who the wheat and the tares are. It's not until you mature that you really get who is the wheat and who is the tare, right? And we won't know until God separates the wheat from the tares. And part of the separation is about who you worship. You see, as it says here, he makes an image to the beast, and as many as would not worship the image of the beast would be killed, right? So that's why this has to do with being in your head and in your hand, because it has to do with what the scriptures say about God's law, where he says it would be as frontlets between your eyes and on your hands, and saying that the law is on your mind, that you believe it, and you're doing your best to follow it, and it's in your hand as your actions, what you're doing, shows that you believe it and that you're trying to follow it, right? So it has to do with worship. If you worship God, you're going to have your own relationship with him within you, within your mind, but also it's going to show through your actions. So you got the mark in your head and in your hand as symbolic for within you, and what's within is what comes without, right? So what's within your heart comes out of the mouth, right? So we can't tell who really worships God or who really worships something else within their heart and mind. We don't know this. And even with the actions, we can't quite tell, because people do things for different reasons. Like somebody who worships God could do wrong things with their actions because they get caught up in their emotions. They get caught up into temptation. They just get caught up and deceived into something, and they do something wrong. This doesn't mean that they're not worshiping God. And vice versa, somebody who's worshiping something else, they could be going to church, singing the hymns, doing the prayer, and doing good deeds, but they could be doing this to get people to think they're good because they want people to think they're good. Kind of like a politician. They're just doing it to get people's support, and they like the attention and other such reasons like that. So you can't really tell who's on what side. But then I think this mark becomes something physical, so that the wheat and the tares are separated, right? So with that being said, let's try to figure out whose mark this is. Now, when we read about this first beast, this beast is mentioned in Daniel. In Daniel chapter 2, we read about the kingdoms represented by metals. The head of gold is Babylon, chest and arms of silver is Medo-Persia, belly and thighs of brass is Greece, the legs of iron is Rome, and then the feet are iron and clay, which is something that has to do with Rome, but it's mixed with something else. Clay in the Bible, like we read in Jeremiah and Isaiah, has to do with God's people, because God made Adam out of the earth, out of the clay, and God's people he's able to mold. They're soft. They're not like the metals that can't be molded. They're stubborn, and they want to stay how they are, right? And in Daniel chapter 7, we read about these beasts, but they're described as animals, as Babylon as a lion, Medo-Persia as a bear, Greece as a leopard, and then Rome, and as it transforms into the feet of iron and clay, is described as this indescribable beast, because it doesn't say if it's reptilian or a mammal. It just says that it has 7 heads and 10 horns, as this beast is described. So this beast is what is talked about in Daniel. So that gives us an idea of who the beast is. Now it says it has 7 heads, right? And if we look at this, we can find 7 heads because we have Babylon, we have Medo, we have Persia, we have Greece, we have Rome, and then as Rome transforms, it becomes Papal Rome. So we have 6 of the 7 heads. So who's the 7th? Well, Israel is the clay mixed with Rome, because Israel said, "We have no king but Caesar." They committed adultery, they become the miry, dirty clay, and they have been mixed with Rome. And they've been stuck like that since then. And that's why you have a heavy influence of Catholicism in Israel. And Israel is the head here that was wounded to death. None of these other kingdoms were wounded to death. Babylon still exists as Iraq. Medo-Persia exists as Iran. You got Greece, still exists as Greece. Rome still exists as Rome. And even Papal Rome exists as the Vatican. Right? It's Israel is the only one that was actually destroyed. And all the people scattered. Its land was given to someone else. Yet this deadly wound is healed, and the whole world wondered after the beast. Because the beast represents governments, a kingdom. And wonder does not mean worship. It means like you're in awe, like, whoa, Israel's back. They're a nation again, and their language is back, and their culture is back. It is like, whoa, and this just happened. And everybody wonders after it, and they're starting to look at Bible prophecy, and it gets people all into this, thinking, what's going on? Is this an act of God? And it draws people in. Right? So everybody's wandering after the beast. A lot of people have focus on Israel if they're religious or not, if they believe in God or not, because they have a lot to do with politics and of the center of a lot of things going on in the world, whether you believe in prophecy or not. So the world's wandering after this beast, right? And as we see here, that he makes war with the saints. And you notice how it refers to the beast also as a singular him. And as this second beast causes all to take this mark, it's referred to as a he. Because the beast, the kingdom, can also represent the leader of the kingdom. Like Babylon could represent Nebuchadnezzar, the head of gold, just as the lion represents the kingdom of Babylon, but it also represents Nebuchadnezzar, as it says that beast was made to stand on its 2 feet, and its wings plucked off, and it was given the heart of a man. And that's what happened to Nebuchadnezzar, as he's a beast, but God humbled him and made him basically live like an ox, thinking that he was an ox, living in the grass for 7 years to humble him. And then he became a man. So we can see that the kingdom can represent the ruler. So when it says he, it's the ultimate fulfillment of the ruler of this kingdom. So when the second beast comes up out of the earth, it starts to exercise the power of that beast whose deadly wound is healed. And the power of Israel was both a state power and a religious power, right? And it makes an image to this beast. And that's what we have America actually doing. America is joined with Israel. It's the 2 horns, America and Israel. And we make an image to them with the menorah, with the 6-pointed star. It's even on the dollar bill. Next to the eagle, I think it is, there's something like 9, 10 stars in the shape. They're 5-pointed stars, but they're in the shape of a 6-pointed star. And this image is to the first beast. His deadly wound is healed. And it says it's a number of a man. They call that star the Star of David, but in the Bible there is no Star of David. What we find in the Bible is that Israel, when they went into rebellion, remember the 13, in Amos chapter 5, is that they actually went after this god Rephaim, and also known as different names like Kronos or Saturn, You can just basically say Satan, also known as Moloch, that they went after this god and they made a star to this god, an image to represent this god, and that the star of Saturn is a six-pointed star. And you can find three sets of sixes within the six-pointed star. So you can take it to be the number of a man. So you can see how that very star could be the mark. And as you can see with Nazi Germany, they ended up putting the Star of David on the Jews. That could be a shadow and foretype of what's to come. Because I was looking at what's going on in America, and I can see how the left is looking just batshit crazy. And I think it's intentional, because the same thing happened in Germany, where they had this big deal going on with communism. And they made it look so bad that it slingshotted everybody into so far right they went into fascism. And I think that's what's going to happen here in America. And things are going to be a lot worse, because they're going to have a lot more technology and a lot more power and a lot more force. This is going to go worldwide. And you can't even buy or sell without this mark. And that's why I see that this is going to be physical. It's going to show the people who are worshiping the government. Now, back in the day, I was real into anarchism because I'm against the government. You know, I don't hide that. And the reason behind that is I don't want to support the government that doesn't support my ideas, my beliefs, and actually does contrary to that. Not only that, contrary to the majority of the people, as they vote for somebody because they want a certain something done, and it's never done, or the opposite is done. And it's like, why am I going to support this? This is a joke. This is stupid. But anyway, while getting into anarchism, I was realizing that people don't worship God. They worship the government. Because when you want something, you don't ask God, you don't pray to God. You go petition to the government. You go vote. You go protest. You do all these things, writing letters to your state representatives in the Senate and Congress and what have you. You do all these things to try to get the government to do it. The government, the government, the government. So the government becomes your God, and I realize that these people, majority of people, probably you watching, actually worship the state. You worship the government. You don't even realize, you don't even think of it that way, but that's what you're doing. And there's going to be a point in time where it's manifested who really is worshiping the beast and who isn't. Because there's going to be a time where you have to separate. Like, I'm fully willing to separate. I want nothing to do with the government. Get rid of that social security number. Learn about common law. I'm good. But there's going to be a time, as we can see already, where they're kind of testing the waters. You know, you can't get your job. You can't go places unless you have a certain something jabbed into you. I think that's a precursor. There's going to be something. And Israel is very hardcore about this. Super hardcore about it. Where cutting people off from jobs and being able to go out into society and do different things because they don't have the jibber jabber. And they say that the people who don't take this jibber jabber are actually hindering the return of the Messiah. Right? So we can see all of that playing a big role. As Israel is anti-Christ. They deny Jesus and they're looking for another Messiah. Whoever does not have the Son or denies the Son doesn't have the Father. Whoever denies the Son is Antichrist. That's what we read in 1 John. So we can't look at Israel, oh, these are God's people, and they can basically do whatever they want, and we say nothing about it. No. If we're against Israel for denying Jesus, if we're against Hindus and Buddhists and atheists, and Catholicism and the people who deny Jesus in different ways, then we have to be against Israel, who is super gung-ho about denying Jesus, right? Especially when they accepted Caesar as their king instead of Jesus, and they gave Jesus up to the power of the Caesar to be crucified. So, you need to take that in consideration. I am not saying bash the Jews, kill Israel. I'm not against Jews. I'm against supporting people who deny Jesus and saying lies like God is with people who deny Jesus and deny God. That's ridiculous. That's nonsensical. That's just brainwashing and indoctrination that you got going on there. So, with this mark of the beast, we can see it has to do with worship, and it has to do with what's going on within your heart and mind. It has to go on with has to do with your actions. So it's motivating your actions, well, why you're doing these things. And it has to do with the number of a man. It has to do with 666. And it has to do with worshiping the beast. And the beast is a government. It's a system of government, a kingdom. And what we see is Israel. As we can see that this one head here, right here, it mentions this at Revelation chapter 17. It talks about this beast a little bit more. And it's interesting what it says about this beast. It says, the beast that thou saw was and is not, and shall ascend out of the bottomless pit. So from John's perspective, he's writing this around 80, 90 AD. Israel is destroyed in 70 AD. So it's been 10, 20 years since Israel existed. And he's like, the beast that thou saw was Israel, is not, because it was destroyed, but it shall ascend out of the bottomless pit. So Israel will return. And it will go into perdition, which is destruction. And they that dwell on the earth shall wonder, whose names were not written in the book of life from the foundation of the world, when they behold the beast that was, and is not, and yet is. So that's what we see, especially with the majority of Christianity in America, really gung-ho supporting Israel, blindly supporting Israel. They have the homosexual capital of the world with Tel Aviv, and these Christians will bash homosexuality and all the stuff going on in America and around the world, but say nothing about Israel and Tel Aviv. Just overlook it. That's bias, that's favoritism, and it's against what God says about showing this kind of favoritism towards anybody. He's no respecter of persons, and we shouldn't be either. A sinner is a sinner, right? But anyway, it goes on to say, and the beast that was and is not, even he is the eighth, and is of the seven, and goeth into perdition. So, as it says here, this king here comes up, is destroyed, because it was but is not now, but he's going to come back, and he's the eighth, but he's of the seven. So he's one of the sevens returned, right? Like we see from John's point of view here. 5 have fallen. So we got Babylon, Medo, Persia, Greece, Israel has fallen. 1 is Rome. 1's to come, Papal Rome. And then 1 comes back, which is Israel, the only one that's received a deadly wound, comes back, right? And you can see how it all comes together. It all comes together. And it's interesting that the great city, it says it reigneth over the kings of the world, right? But it also refers to the city, I believe it's in the next chapter, as spiritually Sodom and Egypt, and where Jesus was crucified. So a lot of people actually put this harlot as Jerusalem, because Jerusalem is referred to as a whore, I believe, in Ezekiel. And Israel is a whore because they have an actual covenant with God, but they said we have no king but Caesar. So they broke the covenant and committed fornication with a government, with a beast. And you see the woman rides the beast. It is confusion, as the Old Testament tells us that if a woman lies with a beast, sexual relations with a beast, it is confusion. It's an abomination. And we can see here about the fornication of this whore and the abomination, and it's Babylon, which is confusion. Confusion has to do with a woman lying with a beast, right? And I'm just going to come here real quick to see if it actually is this chapter which talks about this city is spiritually Sodom and Egypt, and where Jesus was crucified. And I'm not sure here, just trying to... Now, a lot of these things, like I'm looking at, I'm not sure how it completely fits to Israel, but at the same time, you got to compare the Bible to the Bible. I'm trying to see here. I'm not sure if it's actually this chapter, but it says, is found with the blood of the prophets of the saints and all that were slain upon the earth. It's kind of like Mel Gibson was blaming the Jews for all the wars of the world, but even Jesus said that they are guilty of all the righteous slain from Abel to Zacharias, and they even put Jesus up to death. But anyway, let's look real quick where that verse is. Spiritually is Sodom and Egypt. That's weird. Maybe I'm remembering it wrong. Let me take the spiritual part out. Where Jesus was crucified. It's 11. There we go, 11:8. So let's take a look there. 11:8. At 2 witnesses, and at verse 8 here, we talk about 2 witnesses prophesying, right? And it says, the holy city shall be tread underfoot for 42 months, right? The only city referred to as the holy city is Jerusalem. Then down here it says, their body shall lie in the street of the great city, which is spiritually called Sodom and Egypt, where also our Lord was crucified. So that refers to Jerusalem, right? So just because physically you think of, oh, the city of God, city of Israel, blessed, spiritually it's not so, right? It's kind of like looking at a lot of people who seem blessed physically, whether it's physically with looks and with charisma and humor and with money and success in life, yet spiritually they are just full of dead men's bones, right? They're basically living their best life now. This life is their heaven. It's the best they're ever going to be. And for those of us who believe, this is our hell. This is the worst it's ever going to be for us. But anyway, we see that connection there. So a lot of people see that city, that whore, as Jerusalem, or as Israel. And it makes a lot of sense. And you maybe say, well, then how can Israel be one of the kingdoms, but also the whore, riding the beast? Well, it's because Israel is both a kingdom and a religious system. So even though the kingdom was destroyed, religiously the Jews still existed, and they were still the whore riding upon the beast through banking and controlling money, which they still do today. And you can hear many people talking about the Rothschilds and such people doing shady things through the banking and through Wall Street and other such things. And yeah, so that's how they're able to ride the beast. So there's two different aspects to Israel. Just like with the Vatican, it's both a kingdom and the head of a religious system. So, with all that being said, it seems like the mark has something to do with Israel and that star of Rephaim that they have on their flag, the star of Saturn. You can just say Satan. And it has something to do with that. And it has to do with something that's eventually actually really put on or in people, because you can't buy or sell without it. Kind of like in Nazi Germany, you had to have your papers. You got to have your papers. And there was a sign of a mark with the Star of David on the Jews. And then here in America and around the world today, there's all kinds of things going on with the jibber jabber, right? So, some things to think about there. But yeah, that is that. The mark, just a real brief here, has to do with worship. Has to do with worship within your heart and mind. Has to do with the worship that comes out with your deeds. And I would also add with your words. And it also has to do with authority and ownership. Like a signature. And it obviously has to do with 666, which is tied to somebody's actual name, since it's a number of a man, as it says here, as the name of the beast. So it has to do with a name, and it's a number of his name. I count the number of the beast, for it is the number of a man, and his number is 600 6. So 6, 6, and 6. Yeah. And the way you see it with that Star of David is that there's a hexagon in the middle of it. So that's a 6-sided shape. And then you have 6 triangles, and then you have, as a star, it has 6 points. So you got your 6, 6, 6. So something to think about there. And think about how Satan subtly deceives the whole world, and even deceives Christians. So you need to get close to God. You can't just trust the government. You can't trust your churches. You can learn a bit from them and work with them and use them as long as it doesn't get you to go against God. But ultimately, separate yourself from those and get close to God, because even the churches are mixed with the government because they're 501c3 organizations. Because if you notice with all the churches, when I talk to these heads of the churches, at least not necessarily the heads of the church, but of different denominations within America, they can't talk about certain things because they're 501c3 organizations. And one of those things is Israel. I'm not going to get into the other couple things that I noticed that they can't get into, but one of them is Israel. You'd be maybe saying, well, they talk about Israel all the time. What I mean is they can't speak out against Israel. When they speak of Israel, they have to be in support. Support, or what's the word? They're indifferent. They can't speak against Israel, and they can't attack Israel. They have to be in support. So, yeah. With that being said, thanks for watching, and take care.